So hello and welcome to the Blockdaemon podcast. Today we're joined by Chris Sharp, CTO of Blockdaemon, and Avery Ching, CTO and co-founder of Aptos, to take a closer look into the Aptos ecosystem and diving deep into the theme of fostering resilience and scalability in the Aptos network. So Chris and Avery, you both come from extremely interesting engineering backgrounds. Avery, you've worked on building and scaling the engineering team for Instagram. Chris, you've worked on building and scaling the engineering team for Apple Pay. Avery, maybe starting with yourself, could you give me an overview of your professional background and career history before we're turning over to Chris?
Absolutely. I try to keep it brief. So I went to school at Northwestern University. I was graduating a little bit early and I didn't know what to do. And so my advisor told me, why don't you get a PhD? And I agreed. So I ended up spending the next 5.5 years in the guts of high performance computing and supercomputing specifically, working on things like MPI and parallel file systems and scaling applications that support some of the largest scientific workloads in the world, such as finite element analysis, protein folding, and other kinds of simulations. After that, I went to work at Yahoo for 4 years on web search and helped build out some cool tools. One of those was Apache Giraffe, a large-scale graph processing system that's open source and available to do things like PageRank, matrix factorization, and other kinds of applications. Fast forward a little bit, I joined Facebook in 2011 and worked on the data infrastructure team and helped build out that technology stack from things like Corona, which was our MapReduce implementation, to Hive. I also helped us scale Spark to the scale that of petabytes and exabytes at Meta, and also working distributed scheduling. In 2018, I joined the Libra team as a pretty early engineer and started off working on Consensus, and eventually grew to become the blockchain platform lead, encompassing the blockchain space, custody solutions, and ecosystems around that product. And finally, in 2021, as it seemed like we were not able to launch blockchain from within Meta, we kind of left to do it outside and have a wider scope. And that's where Aptos Labs was formed.
Great stuff. And Chris, yourself, maybe a bit of your professional background, career history, touching on those points.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. I joined Blockdaemon in May of last year, 2022. Prior to that, I had spent previous 23 years at Apple. Most recently, had the privilege from late 2012 to 2022 building all aspects of Apple Pay. So it includes everything from credit and debit card provisioning to transit to identity. Worked on Apple Cash and later Apple Card. Just had my fingers pretty much in everything. Prior to the experience with Apple Pay, I have had the privilege of working on I think what would be considered the world's first electronic SIM. And all these years later, in iPhone 14, I think it's actually shipping in mass numbers of products and whatnot. So that was a really cool experience. Before that, did some things around .Mac and MobileMe and iTools, and then really started my career at Apple on the credit card processing side of things. And so in some ways, it was sort of full circle, payments to not payments, back to payments in some ways. So that's been quite a journey. I've had a really wonderful time, building great products, shipping them to consumers, and just thrilled to be working on some really cool things with the Blockdaemon team now.
That's great, Chris. And Avery, could you briefly describe what Aptos is and how does it set itself apart from the other layer ones in the market today?
I would love to. So in 2018, when we were thinking about what Meta would do within the blockchain space, we looked around, we saw Bitcoin and Ethereum and some other projects starting to take off a little bit, and thought, this is really cool tech. This is super novel. And what do we think is the right tool set and the right interfaces and scalability stack to support the billions of people that come to Meta every day? And with that in mind, we built out a new programming language called Move, a safer way of programming smart contracts and something that would actually support the scale in terms of performance that Meta would need. Also, that we started to build out a new technology stack called the Diem blockchain, which, referring to Chris's background, was going to be around payments initially as a use case, but broadly speaking, could be applied to any kind of blockchain use cases in the future. And so that's our differentiating thoughts, really around solving two problems in the space. One is around the UX experience specifically. There's a lot of challenges with respect to how do people onboard into blockchain. It's very cumbersome with mnemonics. with private keys and things to memorize. And if you lose them, of course, you lose everything. And how do we solve those from kind of a more user point of view? And we have some really cool things in the blockchain, such as key rotation, management of keys and custody through smart contracts that provide novel solutions there. And then from the kind of infrastructure side, how do you build a system that scales the same way the internet does? Imagining what cloud computing has done for internet applications across the world to support billions of people in Instagram, in YouTube, and in products like Apple Pay. We have to have a blockchain technology that can scale with it, and thinking about how do we design from the ground up an infrastructure that can support all the resources that validators have available to them. So as Blockdaemon gets more and more powerful machines available to them and supports them even in different kinds of environments, how does the blockchain take advantage of them to support the largest applications in the world?
Fantastic. And I know you mentioned Move there, and I'd love to double click on that in a moment. But first of all, I'd like to touch on the topics of scalability and resilience, both topics extremely important for Instagram, Apple Pay, and now Aptos and Blockdaemon. Aptos officially launched in 2022, but the heartbeat of the chain, the consensus protocol, when reading the Aptos white paper, it was tested extensively in several iterations ever since 2019, with dozens of node operators, multi-wallet ecosystem. Just talk to me maybe about the journey, taking a step back. What has the journey been like towards preparing for mainnet launch over the years and laying the groundwork for network resilience, and how you think about scalability and resilience, particularly from an infrastructure perspective?
Wonderful question, Connor. So I think something that's really underestimated in this industry is the challenge of building distributed systems and deploying them into production. If you've kind of worked in that space, I've done a lot of them in the past. It usually takes many years before the system becomes reliable and ready for deployment at the scale of something like a Meta. Having done that with Spark, having done that with our MapReduce implementation, Hive, et cetera. And then you take the challenges of blockchain, which are 100x harder. That system that you've been building now has to survive resiliency in a public atmosphere, in a public environment. And that's just way more tricky. There's economics involved, there's governance involved, there's thoughts about how do you think about decentralization and what do you consider the most important components. And so just appreciating that fact a little bit, we began building in 2018. We work with a bunch of amazing node providers such as Blockdaemon and others actually from those early days to deploy what we call like a private DM mainnet, and trained alongside these operators in terms of how do we do upgrades in a scalable way. That's one of our key differentiators. The idea is that technology for blockchain is just in the early innings right now. We're not at the maturity of a PostgreSDB or MySQL DB where the improvements are more incremental in nature. We're still the space where it's a lot of exploring about the technology stack and how do we get to that maturity where technology is going to be on a less ascending curve. And so for us, upgradability is key. And we tested that with our node providers from day one in kind of 2019, 2020. Could we change our consensus protocol seamlessly? And we did that with our node operators multiple times. And most recently in February, we were able to do our first upgrade where we did a pretty major improvement in terms of the new Move features that came available, new cryptography primitives from the platform side. And coming up soon, I think probably in April or May, most likely May, we'll be seeing our Quorum Store go live, which is a massive improvement in terms of how we did data dissemination in a parallelizable way. So that's the kind of core things that we find extremely interesting and important for.
Very interesting. And Chris, from the node infrastructure side of the house, as a node operator, how does a company such as Blockdaemon contribute to the health of the Aptos network? And what role does infrastructure play in fostering resilience and scalability for the various different networks that Blockdaemon supports?
Yeah, good question, Connor. In terms of sort of fostering resilience and scalability, I would look at it as, we've been a partner with Aptos and testnets going back, into 2022, and with the DM, I think lineage, you could say we were some of the first folks to help run some of these things, right? And so, that's one way. Obviously, what we bring to the table is multiple nines of uptime. We've got cloud and data center partnerships that make it so that we can really support the sort of decentralization aspects and making sure that we're running in diverse data centers and cloud infrastructure hosting opportunities. We bring obviously 24/7, 365 monitoring, alerting, engineering support You know, we have, you know, products around making sure that from a staking perspective, you know, that our institutional partners are insured against any kind of slashing and this sort of thing. And you know, we've got financially audited you know, reports. We're ISO certified. You know, we're here to stay. I don't want to say the adults in the room, but we take this job very seriously, and we look at partnerships with the you know, engineers at Aptos as key, right? Because this is together how we you know, essentially realize a sort of decentralized future.
Absolutely. And Avery, for yourself, Aptos seems to have made great strides in marrying scalability with a developer-friendly ecosystem. Specifically, you mentioned the implementation of the Move programming language as a way of building user-ready applications. Maybe talk to me a bit more about Move and some of the advantages it offers developers.
Absolutely. So Move is designed in mind to be super safe, but also as a part of that, as an important part of that, it really is how do you kind of get developers to deploy the applications as quickly as possible to the blockchain. Safety is kind of a requirement, right? You can't write an application and deploy it unless you've been audited, well tested, and that can take a long time in different technology stacks because you know, due to a lack of auditing support in general, but also there's just so many ways you could, you know, as a programmer, you can make mistakes. And I think we're really used to a world where programmers have been continually making mistakes kind of rolling forward. And that's normal in most of the industry. But when it comes to smart contract programming, there's no room for and no tolerance for those kind of mistakes that can cost people their assets and their funds. So in this case, Move is about starting off simple, you know, really going along the side, like the guidance of something like a Rust language where, you know, safety first, we push all the errors in Rust to the kind of compile time phase as opposed to runtime. And the same thing is true with Move. There's just fewer things you can do to hurt yourself. So for example, if you have a way to represent a currency in other languages, you might represent it as an integer. And in Move, you know, there's many ways to make mistakes with integers, right? You can accidentally forget about them in functions. You can multiply them, divide them, raise them to exponents. There's a lot of things you can do, which might cause, you know, unintended effects with respect to supply or the way that those integers are transferred between users. With respect to something like Move, you can have something like a coin contract or a coin standard in which those coins are impossible to make those mistakes on. You can't leave them behind in function calls. You can't accidentally, you know, multiply them without, you know, getting those coins from somewhere else. There has to be a bunch of safeguards in terms of how the supply is changed over time. And those just make it much safer and simpler to program with, as opposed to kind of more generic programming languages that have been meant for many other kind of use cases in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of building the developer adoption, the developer ecosystem around Move, I recently read that the Aptos Foundation and Web3 investor and accelerator Outlier Ventures have announced a Web3 accelerator, which kicks off in May. Maybe just, you know, talk to me about how important these kind of initiatives are, you know, in catering to developers, individual contributors, but also, you know, building relationships with exchanges, professional blockchain infrastructure companies. How important are all of these disparate groups in creating a diverse ecosystem?
Oh, everyone is important. I mean, I think it really takes, you know, it takes a village. It actually takes more than a village when it comes to a blockchain. In terms of community aspects, you know, we've been very fortunate to have folks like Blockdaemon that have been with us for a very long time, and many others in the node provider space have been supporting our network from many years ago. But also, as you mentioned, there's Outlier Ventures, there's other accelerator programs we're working with to help bring the benefits of Move to the smart contract space and to Web3 in general. We actually ran kind of an internal accelerator ourselves based on an internal hackathon we had back in May at our office, just to understand how people felt about a new programming language and felt about deploying applications this way. You know, there's been a lot of talk about EVM as being the very dominant language in the space, and there's a lot of interesting tools around it for sure. But our thought was, how do we take programmers and train them in Move and see what they can do in 36 hours? And in that hackathon, they built an amazing array of things, including NFT marketplaces, wallets, some games. And that really gave us the confidence to see that Move was something that people could adopt easily and build quickly with. And it kind of validated our thesis around the idea that it's really about getting developer time to market. And that's something Move can do extremely well. We ran an internal hackathon program, like I said, in May. Some of those programs kind of graduate into an accelerator that we also kind of internally ran, and taking a team like Outlier Ventures, who's just much better doing it than we are internally, and having that kind of grow and exponentially and scale. We're really excited about the new applications that will come out of it.
And that's great, Avery. And you touched on, accelerating time to market there, really, really important. And Chris, on the topic of developer-friendly tooling, Blockdaemon allows anyone to spin up an Aptos node within 5 minutes with no code required via the Blockdaemon app. Just talk to me about what are the types of engineering challenges that such service involves, and then how has Blockdaemon been able to overcome these and position as a leading blockchain infrastructure provider?
Sure. I mean, first of all, we've spent a lot of time in the trenches, right? As far as understanding how to create the internal abstractions in order to be able to handle these things is something that we spent a lot of time on. We have a product we call NodeQ that effectively helped us orchestrate this, and so for us, we're able to take all of the things that we've learned, across all of the different kinds of, 50 or so different blockchains that we support, and really codify those, and automate, and effectively, get benefits or momentum as a result of the things that we learned, right? And so, you can take two different approaches, right? You can take an approach where you sort of play whack-a-mole, or you just kind of put things in place and hope that they work, or you can build platforms. And we've taken, I think the latter process, which is harder, but in the end ultimately allows us to move more quickly. A lot of what I'm doing right now at Blockdaemon is based on years of experience of building massively scalable services for companies like Apple, right? And so it comes down to making sure our processes scale, and making sure our services scale, and that we have the right people working on the right problems in any given quarter. So just classic software engineering practices, and just making sure that we're applying those as we look quarter by quarter into what we should be doing, and how we where do we make investments, and whatnot. So our real North Star is just making sure that you can go to a web app, click a button, and 5 minutes later get an Aptos node up and running. So it's got to be simple, it's got to be secure, it's got to be scalable. And ultimately you don't get there overnight, right? So we've made a lot of investments with a lot of smart people over many years to basically get that sort of engine fine-tuned.
Absolutely, Chris. And just when we say simple, secure, easily deployable, just maybe touch on what are the nuts and bolts components that go into that actually bring that to life.
Sure. As I mentioned, I think it's first and foremost a focus on what the end user experience is going to be, right? And then working backwards from there in terms of all of the things that have to exist. A lot of times, it's tempting to sort of take a build it and they will come approach, and we've done kind of something quite different, right? Which is we're going to sort of work on things from a platform perspective. I mentioned a key component in terms of NodeQ, all the way to the front end, and making sure that those experiences are things that our customers can use and not necessarily have to get into the weeds with. Same goes for the sort of Ubiquity API, which is our sort of blockchain agnostic API, which powers some of the biggest exchanges in the world, and we're super proud of that, because obviously you have to, from a scalability and reliability perspective, build these things so that they're able to handle just a massive amount of load. At the same time, it really is a difficult engineering task to be able to create abstractions that facilitate blockchain agnostic access and data. And we've got a ton of really interesting things in the pipeline there that will just get better and better over time.
Fantastic, Chris. And Avery, for yourself, one thing that stood out to me from the white paper specifically for Aptos was to bring Web3 to the masses. As a parting thought here, what are some of the promising use cases that can or are being built on Aptos that leverages this scalable infrastructure? And also, I noticed that earlier in March, it was announced that the Aptos NFT bridge had launched, enabling users to bridge NFTs via Wormhole from other chains such as Arbitrum, Avalanche, Ethereum, Polygon to Aptos and vice versa. maybe touch on that, and also what are some of the promising use cases that you see being built on, the bedrock of reliable infrastructure that's been developed?
Yeah, there's a couple there. Well, first of all, we were very fortunate when we launched. I think we had 30 projects come live within a day, which was amazing. And I think now it's been about 5 months, a little more than 5 months. And there are more than 100 projects live on top of Aptos. So we're really excited about the community. There's been many projects built in different kinds of areas in focus, including gaming, social, finance, and also media and entertainment more broadly. There are a couple that I would love to call out. One of them is NPixel, a AAA gaming studio out of South Korea with millions of users in their previous hit, Grand Saga. They're building the Web3 version of that, Grand Saga Unlimited, on top of Aptos. They demoed at GDC earlier this week, and they had a cool PC bong set up where people could play and test the game. And they're really trying to push the envelope here in terms of gameplay. I think there's been a lot of talk about kind of NFTs in games and virtual economies that people are used to. But in terms of on-chain gameplay, I think this is an area where NPixel is really being able to drive some new ideas around proof of play and others because of the scale and size of Aptos. And the reason is, with a blockchain that can support extremely low latency, I think some folks have probably seen the Messari report where we had the lowest minute latency available in any network out there, and also the kind of high throughput that Aptos offers due to its scalability requirements. That gamers can get a really unique experience on Web3, and that Web3 can bring utility and add value to a chain and to a game, as opposed to kind of being like another form of tokenomics, basically. So that's something we're really excited about, and seeing millions of players potentially being able to use the Aptos network at scale is something that's really, really interesting. The other use case that's super exciting is Chingari. It's a Web3 social platform, kind of like a new form of TikTok in so many different ways, but with so many new features that include many elements of Web3 where we think there's a ton of value added. So for instance, being able to connect content creators directly with fans, supporting tipping, supporting staking and governance, and thinking about how that applies to video NFTs as well as content moderation. They've taken a really interesting approach. They've already got 45 million monthly active users, and thinking about those users coming to Web3 on top of Aptos and what they can do with the new kind of availability of block space on the platform is super exciting to us as well.
Very good. And any parting words, Avery or Chris, as we wrap up today, they'd like to share?
I mean, the one important thing I'll say is just I want to say I appreciate what Blockdaemon has done in terms of being able to scale up infrastructure for us. We've been working together for a long time, since our DM days, and being able to kind of train together and help build reliable infrastructure that spans from different kinds of data centers, different cloud environments. Being able to see that Blockdaemon and other providers of its caliber can actually shift seamlessly from one region to another, and also support secure infrastructure where operators don't, one mistake doesn't take down the whole fleet, essentially, is something that people take for granted. But I know how complex that is, having worked in infrastructure for a long time, and also just being appreciative of the fact that there's something that we love to see operators pioneering with us in terms of the techniques and the training that goes into making sure you run a very high performance, secure blockchain. And so I just want to kind of leave that thought.
Very kind. And thank you so much.
And on that note, Avery, Chris, thank you very much for your time today, and take care.